Chapter 8. What are ethical and legal issues facing teachers? The teacher's responsibility. What does all of this have to do with the teachers? First, it is responsibility of teachers to convey to the young and fundamental moral message that we are legally and ethically bound to one another. Much of this moral message is incorporated into the content of our curricula, from our great stories to our history as a people. Second, a unique set of ethical relationships and legal obligations is embedded in teachers. As a consequence, teachers carry a special ethical and legal burden. This second issue is the subject of this chapter. At the heart of the teacher's unique ethical and legal relationship with the students is power. Like it or not, power resides in the office of a teacher. Compared with a corporate executive or a military officer, it may not appear that a teacher has a great deal of power. In reality, the teacher has a special type of power. This power arises from the fact that the teacher has an impact on people when they are still a very malleable stage. The teacher is in command of the classroom insofar as he or she has responsibility for what goes on. Teachers evaluate their students. They not only mark them with tangible symbols that they become part of students, official records, but they also mark their minds and hearts. Many careers are open to you, but few offer such truly an awe-inspiring power. The ethics of teaching. Being an ethical teacher means a special relationship with your students and other people with whom you work with. Consider the following situation as told to educator Kenneth Howe by a practicing teacher. The characteristics of ethical teaching. This story provides just a peek into the teacher's ethically complex world. Howe suggests that in the dealing with issues involving ethical judgment, we as teachers need to exhibit 6 characteristics: appreciation for moral deliberation, empathy, knowledge, reasoning, courage, and impersonal skills. Appreciation for moral deliberation. We need to see an ethical dilemma such as Maryland's as a situation characterized by conflicting and comparing moral interests. In this case, Connie's need for a job, the student's need for a component teacher, and other teachers need to be fair in what they say to and about Connie. We must see the complex moral dimensions of the problem and appreciate that the care must be taken to protect the rights of all parties. Empathy. Empathy is the ability to mentally get inside the skin of a person. We need to feel the others in an ethically troublesome situation and are feeling. In the case described, we would need to empathize with everyone who is affected by the burden of a questionable teacher, the students and their parents, Connie and Marilyn, and the other teachers. Knowledge. One of the most valuable tools of a teacher who is able to deal effectively with ethical issues is knowledge. We must remember the facts that will enable us to put an issue in context. What does Connie actually do in the classroom? Which formal procedures are in place to deal with ineffective or incompetent teachers? We have to be able to formulate reasonable approaches to the problem and then, from experience, anticipating the consequences of each approach. In Marilyn's case, she has to be able to think clearly about the alternatives, such as participating in the principal's questionable plan, or perhaps directly confronting Connie, and she must think through with some degree of accuracy what the likely consequences of such actions would be. This process requires knowledge of the context in which she and Connie are working. Reasoning. To reason is to reflect systematically on an issue. When we reason about an issue, we move through it step by step and draw conclusions, or we compare a particular event or action with some moral principle and come to some conclusion. For instance, Marilyn may hold a moral principle, the notions that people should not deceive others and that spying is deception. Through reasoning, she may come to the conclusion that the principal has asked her to do is spying. Of course, this line of reasoning leaves Marilyn with another problem: how to tell her principal that his plan is unethical. Courage. To feel, to know, and to reason are not enough. To be ethical, we must act, and actions sometimes take courage. To be ethically correct often requires the willpower to act in what we perceive to be the right way rather than the comfortable way. Frequently, when confronted with a seemingly no-win dilemma like Maryland, we tend to ignore it in the hope that we will simply go away. However, as the theologian Harvey Cox sees it, not to decide is to decide. Among other things, Maryland must find a way to tell her principal that she simply cannot be part of his secret reporting network. Besides courage, this act will require tact. Needed a guiding code of ethics. Behind the six-part process of dealing with ethical issues is something rather intangible, but nevertheless quite real. A personal code of ethics. Each of us has one, although some are beacons and others are dim lights in the dark room. For example, in Marilyn's response to her principal's request that she spy on Connie, what does she will be influenced by her personal code of ethics? This is Marilyn's own answer to the question, what is the right thing to do here? Is it will come into play? When individuals enter the classroom as teachers, they are not always able to act in a manner that they find most satisfying. For instance, a student rude remark to you may cry out for the sarcastic comeback, and you may have the perfect one on the tip of your tongue. The actions of a student, even a very small child, may provoke a rush of anger. An athletic coach, a good friend, may ask you to raise the grade of one of your students who has become ineligible to play on the coach's team. Whatever you like to do or what you might have done before as a civilian is of little importance in the situations you must respond as a professional. As a teacher, you need to be ready and act for a well-formed code of ethics. As mentioned earlier, ethics deal with the right thing to do. Everyone is expected to do the right thing, but the teacher's responsibility and power ratchet up. Teachers are often must be able to make ethical decisions on the spot. Telling the athlete's coach, I'll think about it, won't do. Our personal answers to questions about what is the right thing to do is represent our code of ethics. Unlike the formal codes of ethics that govern doctors and established teachers' organizations such as the National Education Association, our personal codes are not written down. Nevertheless, they are quite real and serve as our daily guide in the moral matters, large and small. Scholars often argue about whether humans are born with the imprinted sense of what is morally correct. Few would suggest that we are born with a full-blown guiding moral philosophy of life. Instead, developing a strong guided code of ethics is one way of primary responsibilities as a member of society. As part of this evaluation, we can draw a variety of sources, including human examples, spiritual and religious wisdom, secular guides, and reason with a moral compass. Secular guides. A large part of our ethical guidance comes from everyday life. A parent regularly repeats an orphism such as a stitch in time saves nine. We see a Nike commercial that urges us to just do it. A red light, we read a bumper sticker imploring us to question authority. These everyday adages and maxims are guides to behavior. Many in turn are richly ethical, such as the methods conveyed by the bumper sticker, perform random acts of kindness. In recent years, there has been an explosion of self-help books on topics ranging from how to succeed in business to how to be a good spouse, much of this content intended to provide ethical guidance to the reader. For instance, most of the self-help parenting books direct parents on issues such as how to raise good children. That is, children who will be considerate of others and know the right from wrong. In reality, these books are helping parents instill a code of ethics in their children. Reason. As we discuss in Chapter 9, what are the psychological foundations of education? Ethics is a branch of discipline of philosophy that aids us intellectually to examine issues of right and wrong. Through the use of reasoning abilities, we can sort out whether an issue has an ethical component and think through the consequences of various courses of action. In the case of Marilyn, she can think through what might happen if she decides to help the principal rebuild a case against her colleague Connie. A significant aspect of being a reflective practitioner, as we urge throughout this book, is the capacity to bring reason to bear on the ethical issues you confront as a teacher. Okay, codes of professional ethics. Teachers do not struggle alone when they face ethical issues. Besides their own understanding, reasoning, and moral compass, they have the support of a professional group. Professional groups such as those composed of doctors, architects, and teachers have special obligations to their clients. Whereas some entire professions have formulated their own universal code of ethics, like the Hippocratic oath taken by all medical doctors. There is no single uncivilly accepted code of ethics for teachers. Nevertheless, several codes of ethics for teachers have been published. The best known of Code of National Education Association's NEA. You can link to the NEA code from the website from this book. In recent years, a number of states' departments of education have also deployed codes of ethics to govern the work of their teachers. Among the more specific codes is the one in the accompanying box. which was developed by the Alaska Professional Teaching Practices Commission. Code of Ethics and Teaching Standards. In fulfilling obligations to students and educator, may not deliberately distort, suppress, or deny access to curricular materials or educational information to promote the personal view, interest, or goal of the educator. Shall make reasonable effort to protect students from conditions harmful to learning or healthy and safety. May not engage in physical abuse of a student or sexual conduct with a student and shall report the commission knowledge of such an act by an educator. May not expose a student to unnecessary embarrassment of disparagement. May not harass, discriminate against, or grant a discriminatory advantage to a student on the grounds of a race, color, creed, sex, national origin, marital status, or political or religious beliefs, physical or mental conditions, family, social or cultural background, or sexual orientation. Shall make reasonable effort to assure that a student is protected from harassment or discrimination on these grounds, and may not engage in a course of conduct that would encourage a reasonable student to develop prejudice on these grounds. May not use professional relationships with students for private advantage or gain. Shall keep in confidence information that has been obtained on the course of providing professional services, unless disclosure serves a compelling professional proposed or is required by law. Shall accord just an equitable treatment to all students as they exercise their educational rights and responsibilities, and fulfilling obligations to the public and educator. Shall take responsible precautions to distinguish between the educator's personal views and those of any educational institution or organization in which an educator is affiliated. Shall cooperate in the statewide student assessment system by safeguarding and maintaining the confidentiality of a test materials and information. May not use institutional privileges for private gain to promote political candidates or for partisan political activities. May not accept a gratuity gift or favor that might influence or appear to influence professional judgment, and may not offer a gratitude gift or favor to obtain special advantage. May not knowingly withhold or misrepresent material information in communicating with the school board regarding a matter before the board for its decision. May not use or allow the use of district resource for private purposes not related to the district's program and operation. Okay. Here we go. Contracts, tenure, and dismissal. Some of the most fundamental legal issues have to do with the legitimacy of employment. When, for instance, is a teacher actually hired? How does a teacher know he or she is an actual teaching position? What does having tenure mean for a teacher? Teachers are not self-employed. They are employees of a school board, or in the case of a private school, of a board of trustees. As employees of a governing body, teachers must be familiar with and abide by the stipulations of a contract issued to them by the school board. If teachers do not fulfill the requirements of the contract, they are at risk of losing their jobs. Contracts to teach. Imagine the following situation. You are a recent college graduate, newly licensed to teach, and you are actively interviewing for teaching positions. Your interviewing at the Long Meadow School District goes extremely well, and the superintendent tells you she would like you to join the faculty. She says that she plans to recommend you hiring to the school board, telling that you, for all intents purposes, you should consider that you have a teaching position because the board usually votes to approve the superintendent's recommendations. You tell her that you would like to join the faculty, accepting her verbal offer. Several weeks go by and you hear nothing from the school district. In the meantime, you are invited to an interview at the Centerville School District. When your interest you realize that it is the ideal school district for you. The school administration seems equally impressed with you, and the several days that the superintendent calls and offers you position. Although you want to accept immediately, you ask the superintendent for a day to think over the offer. In fact, that you really want to do, find out your status at Longview Middle School District. Do you really have a job there? If you accept the offer at Centerville, are you violating some legal obligations to Long Meadow School District? The answer to these questions depend on whether you have a legal contract for employment. A contract is a binding agreement between two or more persons or parties. It indicates the rights and responsibilities of each party to the agreement, and that all teachers, new or old, sign a contract with their Board of Education or trustees. Contracts differ from district to district and from state to state, but they generally specify the teacher's salary, course, teaching assignments, or instructional areas, the maximum class size, length of school day and school year, and grievance procedures. A grievance is a formal expression of a complaint about an unsatisfactory working condition. Grievances typically concern disputes over working conditions. When a person files a grievance, or he or she usually argues that a working condition was in violation of the teacher's contract. Additionally, contracts generally indicate whether the local teachers association or union is the official or bargaining agent for teachers. In addition to the school board, must act officially to ratify a teacher's contract. Many people assume that contracts must be written. In fact, unless state law requires a written contract, and an oral contract that includes all legal requirements can be also legally binding. In the previously described scenario, unless all of the conditions were included in your discussion with the Longmeadow superintendent and the school board acted upon or ratified the superintendent's recommendation to hire you, you did not have a legally binding offer. Therefore, you could accept the Centerville offer without hesitation. Now, suppose the scenario were altered slightly. What if you had signed a contract for Longmeadow School District and then accepted the Centerville offer? In that instance, you could be held liable for a breach of contract. A legal contract is a binding on both sides. This is the both school district and the teacher. If either party violates the conditions of the contract itself is said to have been breached and the other party can be used for damages. When an injured party successfully sues the other party for a breach of contract, the court may order the contract be fulfilled, but the injured party receives monetary damages or both. For instance, the district may have to rehire a fire teacher and pay damages, or a teacher who walks away from the job may have to pay the district's cost of finding a replacement. In addition, whenever a teacher breaches a contract, his or her professional reputation is in danger of being tarnished. Given those concerns, before you accept any position, you should study the contract carefully and ask about anything unclear to you. The contract will govern many of the important details of your life as a teacher. Tenure. Imagine a few years have passed since you accepted the Centerville position. At what point are you guaranteed tenure, or what some states call continuing contract status? New teachers are hired on a probationary basis, with the probationary period often lasting 3 years, so the school district can ensure that the non-tenured teacher can teach well enough to be granted permanent faculty status. State law determines when a teacher is eligible for tenure and outlines requirements for earning tenure or continuing contract status. Some states require that the school board takes some positive action to grant the teacher tenure status. In other states, the teacher is granted tenure automatically when he or she successfully completes the probationary period. What does possessing tenure actually mean for a teacher? The word tenure comes from the Latin root meaning to hold, or as in hold that job. Thus, if you become a tenured teacher in the Centerville School District, you are entitled to contract renewal every year. The general purpose of a tenure was nicely stated by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania in 1957. Tenure helps to maintain an adequate and competent teaching staff free from political or arbitrary interference. In addition, tenure allows capable and competent teachers to feel secure and to perform their duties efficiently. Tenure guarantees your position as a teacher in the school district, but it does not mean that you are guaranteed to have exact same teaching assignment every year. A teacher can be reassigned to teach second grade after being a fourth grade teacher for years, or a school district can reassign a tenured teacher to another school in the district. Tenure is an issue about what both general public and teachers often hold strong views and just often are greatly misformed. Contrary to the views of many poorly performing tenured teachers can be fired. There are clear sets of procedures administrations can follow to provide evidence of necessary for dismissal. Of course, following the procedures take a good deal of time and energy if a solid case is to be made. Recently, there has been a growing chorus of complaints about what many and the public believe in the failure of the nation's schools to get rid of ineffective teachers. In 2010, the popular documentary film Waiting for Superman appeared to blame tenure for much of its ills of American public schools. One of the facts that to blame film presented was what in Illinois, 1 in 57 doctors loses his or her medical license, 1 in 97 loses her license to practice law, and 1 in 2,500 teachers loses his or her teaching credentials. This failure to dismiss poorly performing teachers is laid at the feet of tenure and the strong legal protection of teachers' unions. For this reason, some educators, critics, and school reforms advocate the elimination of tenure, though it is doubtful that this will happen in the foreseeable future. Copyright laws. Good teachers are always on the hunt for effective teachers' materials, a story that carries a special message, a poem that captures an idea with beauty and economy, and an article that contains the latest information about an issue students are studying. And it's shared with the class that the wide availability of photocopying equipment makes this practice all too easy. Printed matter is the product of someone's labor in the same way you are painting a piece of furniture is. Under the law, it is considered intellectual property, and the creator of author has a legal right to receive a reward for his or her labor. But the creator of an author has a legal right to receive a reward for his or her labor with such a payment. Few people could afford to write books, plays, or articles. For this reason, first in 1909 and more recently in 1976, the U.S. Congress passed copyright laws to protect writers and publishers from an unauthorized use of their material. For teachers, the heart of the current copyright law is the fair use guidelines, which printed materials teachers may photocopy under which conditions they may do so. The general principle behind fair use is not to impair the value of owners' copyrights, but diminishing the demand for their work, thereby reducing potential income for the owner. In other words, if people simply copy printed materials whether they want, they will not buy the books and publish, and authors will suffer. Some copying is allowed. Of course, it is important for teachers to know what they may do. Videotapes, software, and the internet. There is a great temptation for teachers to tape material off the air, to build tape libraries off materials to use in the instruction. Although this tactic may be effective pedagogy, but it may not be legal. Commercially produced videos are intellectual property, and like printed materials are covered by the U.S. copyright laws. Copyrighted television programs, and most often they're copyrighted, can be kept for only 45 days, after which they must be erased or taped over. Also, during the first 10 days of the taping, the teacher may show the tape only twice, once for initial presentation and once when instructional enforcement. It is called for. Finally, schools cannot routinely record material for potential later use by teachers. Such recording can be done at the teacher's request. The personal computer has helped revolutionize American life in general and American education in particular. Since 1976, a huge new source of intellectual property has burst on the scene and opened up a plethora of new opportunity. The internet being the most dramatic example. Today it is possible to copy information from the government's agencies, liberal legal systems, commercial sites, and other schools with the click of a mouse. Given the ready accessibilities of websites, you may be tempted to copy a research report from an online news information service and makes copies for all students in your class. However, contrary to what many believe, the internet is not in the public domain. Most web pages, including their information on them, both have the code used to create them, are protected by copyright law because the internet is global and regulated by international treaty. That Berne Convention for the Protection of Literacy and Artistic Works, to which the United States and the most English-speaking nations are signatories. The law in this area is still evolving, and until it is settled, we suggest that you follow the fair use of guidelines cited up with the changes and in copyright laws regarding digital as well as printed and video materials. Computer software programs are not treated in the same way as text. Video clips are still pictures. Commercially sold software differs from material taken off the internet. Software should not be passed around and copied. In some cases, the software publisher may not be the purchaser to make one backup copy of the software, but making any other copies in a violation of the copyright laws. Although all this may seem like overkill, it is important for teachers to follow the rules, not simply because it is a law, but because students will follow their example. Lifestyle and the teacher. Teachers bring into their classrooms more than their minds and their lesson plans. They bring in their attitudes and values. Elementary and secondary teachers traditionally have been considered extensions of the family and passing on to the young community positive values. In the past generations, teachers who behaved in ways counter to the community's values were dismissed. Teachers were summarily fired for homosexuality, being pregnant and single, living with someone of the opposite sex, using illegal drugs, being publicly drunk, or committing a crime. However, the late 1960s saw a shift in the balancing between the community's right to require certain standards or behavior and the rights of individuals to pursue their own lifestyles and values. Although the law in some areas has not been settled, many questions judgmental, it is unclear. Okay, almost done. Alright. Freedom of speech. The right to say that we want where we want in the cornerstone of free society, and that it is near and dear to Americans. As Justice William O. Douglas stated, Restriction of free thought and free speech is the most dangerous of all subversions. It is one un-American act that could most easily defeat us. Despite U.S. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, the freedom of speech does not give a person the right to yell, fire in a crowded theater, or knowingly, maliciously say right lies and damages reputation of another. In schools, freedom of expression must be balanced with the school's responsibility to maintain safe and orderly environment to protect the feelings of reputations. And I believe we are done. Nope. Last one. End of the chapter. Records and students' right to privacy. In this information age, most of us probably have a digital history tucked away on some kind of computer disks. For students, this history may consist of school records, various test scores, and ratings by teachers on everything from citizenship to punctuality. Teachers and other staff members judge a student's character and go potential, and others use judgments to decide whether their student should go to that school or get the job. Certainly, we need a system for exchanging information about one another. Otherwise, we would hire only our friends or attend only the schools where enough people knew us to vouch for us. Unfortunately, the kind of information in the school records may be highly imperfect, and the danger that will be misinterpreted or fall into the wrong hands is great. In the early 1970s, a series of situations came to the light in which information was poorly used, in which parents and students were denied access to records. When a diagnosis was used to justify sending a child to a class for students with mental retardation, in response to the U.S. Congress passed the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act in 1974. The act, also known as the Buckley Amendment, outlines who may have see a student's record and under the what conditions. Parents who previously were kept from many of the officially recorded judgments that affected their children's futures are the clear winners as a result of this legislation. Our final word. This chapter marks the beginning of what we hope will be your ongoing probe of these important roles that two related issues, ethics and law, play in the life of a teacher. Together, these issues increasingly permeate the school environment, whereas ethical issues may arise timeless questions, some laws continually change, and even in the courts may be giving a different complexion to some of the decisions cited in this chapter. Also, this chapter touched on many issues only briefly and omitted others entirely because of lack of space. We urge you to move on from this introduction and investigate further the work of the teacher and its larger ethical and legal framework. The end.